Questions of much graver and universal interest occupy our minds today.
Hello, my name is Lieutenant Eric Schein. I'm a graduate of the United States Merchant Marine Academy at Kings Point. I'm a naval officer and a federal maritime officer. In Volume 1, I went into a little bit of what is going on today, who is doing it, why they are doing it, the bigger picture. And what I want to get into now is how they do it and how they infiltrate and or invade our own country and bring in loyalists, royalists who are handmaidens and or servants to the royal families of not just Europe, but Asia and other areas. And you have to realize that many of these royal families have moved their heir apparents or lines of their family into areas not only in South America, but throughout Asia, and are working with other royal families who have been around for a very long time and had their own dynasties. But what they do, and I'll give you an example, is Robert Dollar, who started Dollar Lines here in the United States eventually, emigrated to Canada. He started a timber company in Canada. This is back in the 1800s, in the late 1800s. Well, mid 1800s to the late 1800s. And this is in Canada that is and has been and continues to be a constitutional monarchy that has the Queen as the head of state, and they are members of the Commonwealth. They have declared quote-unquote independence. They do quote-unquote write their own laws, but they are still members of the Commonwealth, something that our founding fathers stood against. Any titles of nobility, any form of royalty or royalism, like Congressman Duncan Hunter, I brought this up before, passing his seat as a congressman or attempting to, and setting his son up to take over his seat when he was running for the GOP presidential candidate. Others have been doing this, even Democrats as far as Henry Waxman and others have been cited and or focused upon for doing the very same thing. And you start to realize what is going on here in America. But how they do it or how they've done it over time is Robert Dollar emigrated to Canada, started a company there, started and was backed by the Queen, of course, with monies from the royal coffers, started a timber company, used it to leverage into the United States, and used his backing, his intellect, the money coming from the crown, his training in the timber industry in Canada to come across to the United States, to immigrate to the United States, start a timber company here in the United States with still strong ties to the royal families, infiltrated the United States, started a corporation or a company here in the United States, eventually took blossoming out from a timber company into a shipping company, started to build and eventually the largest shipping company here in the United States, with other royal families helping by hiring him, contracts, a little help from within the federal contracting arena, within the federal government. And you can see this, basically a bald face, in your face example where a contracting officer from, I believe it was DOD, awarded the Air Force contract, not to Boeing, not to an American company, not to a company residing even here in the United States, but to Airbus, a consortium in the European Union, to build our national security, a portion of our national security in the refueling tankers for our aircraft. This is how the game is played nepotism, cronyism, favoritism that relates back to some very old world, old families that have been around for a very long time that know how to play the game of politics and administration. Robert Dollar came into the United States, started Dollar Lines, a shipping company, which was eventually, it became the largest shipping company here in the United States, was passed on to his son, Stanley Dollar. Stanley Dollar bankrupted the company just before, and conveniently so, World War II. He extracted all of the wealth out of this company or corporation. It was too big to fail. The U.S. government took it over. Roosevelt helped recapitalize it under war-like conditions to where anything goes, whether union contracts or no union contracts. It is a warlike condition where under executive caveat, executive edict, executive order, the president can literally, basically, effectively do anything he wants. There's even case precedents basically to where he can have people, and that's what's going on right now, is people held and detained, and these people are not being held and detained by some rabid right-wing warmongering arm of the Republican Party. It is a bunch of individuals who have taken over that party and have aimed it against the American people. Dollar Lines eventually became American President Lines, Hamburg America Shipping Lines, a corporation from Germany that was one of the three corporations that was shut down by Roosevelt in the middle of World War II because the Bush family was caught trading with the enemy. They were basically effectively given back this company after the war as part of being on the board and or involved with American President Lines. American President Lines was sold after the war to a holding company, which is much like what they're trying to do with CSX, much like they did even with Chrysler. Remember, Chrysler was not only taken over by Daimler-Benz, and many within Chrysler thought that Chrysler was actually buying Daimler-Benz. It's now been spun off and is in a holding company called Cerberus, which is a Greek mythological character. It is the dog, it is the name of the dog that guards Hades. What kind of an individual would name their company or their corporation after the three-headed dog that guards Hades? You have to really wonder. And these people are members of, Skull and Bones is the Jolly Roger. It is the pirate flag. It is, these individuals are members of a death cult. They are a bunch of warmongers, and they use war, just like the issue with Robert Dollar and Stanley Dollar and the recapitalization of American President Lines in the war. The very same thing is going on now. But I'll give you another example that's even more pertinent to today. Sarah Palin, who is a heir apparent of the Heath candy bar family, they got their start by an award of a federal contract from the U.S. government in the middle of World War II, and the award for the contract was to provide English toffee candy bars to our troops in the middle of war. And what that is, when a contract is awarded like that, you have literally, and I hate to use the term, but effectively knighted that family and given them, that you've basically set them up for life and for perpetuity so that their family can grow using the resources of a contract like this to establish themselves here in the United States. And Palin is from Minnesota. She's related to Governor Tim Pawlenty. You start to look into all of these ties and the lineage of the individuals who were involved in not only the Keating scandal, the issues with John McCain himself, his wife, Cindy McCain, the beer heiress. When you start to look into the ties of all of these families, not only to war, but how they establish themselves, and not only are they trying to establish a system of royalism, kings and queens, and they will use our own military against us to establish this system of feudalism, a monarchy here in the United States. It is actively, aggressively already underway. And if you do not realize this, this is the core issue to everything going on. Titles of nobility. I've brought up before Stephen Gyllenhaal, a writer, director, producer from Hollywood. His daughter, Maggie Gyllenhaal, she was in the recent Batman movie, Dark Knight, and her brother, Jake Gyllenhaal, he was in Brokeback Mountain. They are now a duke and a duchess, or a prince and a princess, because their father has been ennobled, made a part of the nobility by the Swedish royal crown family. And when you think of Sweden or the Dutch or German, because Dutch is German, or that entire region, the Netherlands, Germany, Bavaria, Australia, Switzerland, Liechtenstein, and more, think of Royal Dutch Shell that controls a large portion of the resources of America and are making a killing not only off of this war, but of oil profiteering, in a time of war and as they were doing in a time of peace. Royal Dutch Shell tells you right in its own name exactly what it is. It is a corporation of the royal families, not only Dutch royal families. It is a shell corporation that they are using to impoverish republics, to impoverish free men of any such republic, to impoverish democracies. And they are now using us as the main vehicle to do this throughout the world, in South America and in other countries, not only in the Middle East, Iran, Iraq. You can look to issues in Iran with Mossadegh in 1953 and more. And one thing I would bring up, and I would ask you to review, because it goes into these very issues, is there is a movie that has just been released. It's called Zeitgeist. It's a German word, and you can look it up and see what it means. A Zeitgeist addendum, and it gets into just how much we have been fed propaganda throughout our lives. It actually gets into the Federal Reserve and more, and our banking system. But if you look into who helped establish the Federal Reserve and the Federal Reserve Act, they are tied to the war industry. Paul Warburg, and you do not get a name like Warburg for being a peaceful individual, for being a man of peace, or a family that has made their living and their livelihood and their dynasty, for want of a better word, or their kingdom off of peaceful enterprise. These individuals love war. Another example of how this is carried out, and what they effectively do is they use federal contracting, they use war and the national security umbrella to cover up their activities, much like Halliburton, KBR, single source contracting. You can look to these large corporate families and even start to look into the system of our courts. Antonin Scalia, a U.S. Supreme Court justice, his father was a member of the American Fascist Society. And so it's not that we're slipping down this slippery slope or that we're just about to go over. We're already far down it. Look to books like Naomi Klein, The Shock Doctrine, Naomi Wolf, Letter to a Young Patriot. Even books that are put out by these neocons, and I like to call them Eurocons, like Philip Bobbitt. He wrote The Shield of Achilles. It gets into European history and how war is used to invade, because you don't have to, even if you win the war, what you do when you win is you take home with you much of that society, much of that civilization, much of that nation state, as we did when we destroyed Germany. To be able to destroy Germany and Nazism and this form of monarchism or feudalism, we had to become much like Germany. And the military-industrial complex now is set on and is being used as an umbrella, including Homeland Security, to enforce and impose a system of royal family rule. Jane Harman is another good example. Harman Kardon Electronics, speakers, stereos, and more. She is one of the richest individuals in Congress, and she does not serve the American people. Dianne Feinstein, another one. She has her name within my own situation, as does Duncan Hunter. Dianne Feinstein effectively turned me over to the CIA through a backdoor channel, through a letter written to Nicole Nason, the Undersecretary for Governmental Affairs for the Department of Transportation, when Porter Goss was the head of the CIA, to effectively continue with their abuse of due process by keeping me within the military tribunal as an alleged civilian for the last 5 years. This is going on now. Creation of the fusion centers, turning the Coast Guard into a branch of military. The Coast Guard, his ties to Admiral Allen, to Pamela Hess. Allen is another name you need to look at. Anderson, Glenn Anderson Federal Building in Long Beach. There are many other individuals from these names. There's a lot of people who hold these names and are good people. There are a lot of people from Germany, Austria, Bavaria, Switzerland, even Liechtenstein, and even England. And I hate to, and I'm sorry to put a thumbs down on England, but guys like Dennis Kucinich, God bless him for whatever his efforts, no matter that they don't show much fruit anytime, and you have to wonder about that. But Dennis Kucinich is married to a British national, 30 years his junior, and they are saying, hands across the Atlantic, that we need to work more closely. I believe that we need independence, not only energy independence, but we need independence from Europe and from the monarchies who are set to restore and who believed to a large extent that we don't elect a president, an administrator, somebody in the Article 2 branch of government that works for Congress, but that we elect a king. And these individuals like Cheney, Bush, and others would love to do away with the 22nd Amendment and have President Bush serve as a monarch, as a tyrant, into a third, fourth, even fifth term. When you start to look at the presidential candidates, and I brought this up again before, and not only John McCain's, but even Barack Obama's ties back to Europe, and even, people will not allow you to talk about Jerusalem. Jerusalem is a kingdom. And no matter what people want to say that it is a democracy, when you really start to peel back the layers, it is much like England. I mean, we've got Berlusconi in charge of Italy now. It might as well be a kingdom as well. Spain, the very same thing. And you look to even the Habsburgs, the family that has controlled European history for the last 1,000 years and has been instrumental in delivering the European Union to the world, and is looking at doing the same thing here in the United States and taking a free republic and merging it with Canada, a constitutional monarchy, and Mexico, that is pretty much a constitutional monarchy as well, although it also has its independence. 1/3 of the wealth of Mexico is controlled by one family. If that's not a monarchy, I don't know what is. And you can call it a republic, you can call it a democracy, you can call it National Socialism, you can call it communism, you can call it capitalism, but when the majority of wealth rests in the hands of a very few families that control everything from legislation to enforcement to even adjudication in our court system, I cannot begin to tell you the number of large corporate families who have been involved in my own situation to block and prevent and keep me from having my day in court. And I've already brought up in other shows, and I'll brought a lot of the names. Ted Olson was involved. His wife, Barbara Olson, was one of the individuals who died in one of the 9/11 planes. Ted Olson not only represented George Bush against Al Gore at the Supreme Court, he was appointed Solicitor General. You have to understand what that position is. Solicitor General is like the 10th U.S. Supreme Court Justice. That is what he is considered because of how powerful he is. He decides when and how the Constitution is defended. The Attorney General effectively works for him. Ted Olson is involved in a major scandal involving the United States Merchant Marine, Matson, American President Lines, a ton of shipping companies, J.P. Morgan, Morgan Stanley, and others, that they are using the current financial crisis to cover up. CSX is involved, which is a rail and shipping company. You can look to, and Crowley Maritime, the Coast Guard, of course, and what is going on, not just the vertical integration of everything maritime to where you cannot work in the maritime industry, and they're actually allowing, much like in our commercial airline industry, to allow importation of foreigners. This is what Harriman Brothers did in the 1800s. They passed a law after the Civil War, which was a war supposedly about slavery, to make it legal to import indentured servants and slaves from China to build our railroads for us. If that is not slavery and a slap in the face to what the Civil War supposedly stood for, you have to go back and really start to analyze what the Civil War was about and the involvement of J.P. Morgan. Not only was J.P. Morgan and his heir apparent, Archie Morgan III, involved in my own situation, but Archie, or J.P. Morgan, came to the United States, helped incite the Civil War. And this was about taking down the United States, having us at each other's throat, much like what is going on right now. They have us in the very same circumstances, although it may look and feel different. They have us ensconced within a modern day civil war so that the American people are not paying attention to what is going on, and that we have a bunch of European and American royalists or loyalists who are working aggressively to destroy America from within. And that has happened to every republic. And one of the reasons they are doing this, and they do not want a United States and or a free republic, is that the Department of Defense, this is just one small piece of what they own and control. The Department of Defense has 66 million acres worldwide. And it's not just the land or even the economic or strategic positioning of where that land is and what it's next to, or the timber on top of it, or the lakes and rivers that are also on top of it, or even the livestock or critters or creatures, the natural wildlife that is on it, but it's the gold, coal, copper, oil, uranium, and other assets, water, and other assets and resources that are underneath this land. 66 million acres. Think if it was only worth $1 each, which it's worth a lot more than that. This land is almost invaluable. It's worth hundreds of trillions of dollars. And what is at stake here is not just even the copyrights and trademarks and patents and ideas, let alone the Constitution, but the things from the Department of Defense that we have constructed and built at taxpayer dollars that they want to use, just like they used for creating the company WD-40 that sells us oil, that lubricating oil, penetrating oil, which is water displacement formula number 40. It's just like I brought up about the Palin and her involvement with Heath Candy Bar. They use government money, government assets, government resources, government secrets to give to themselves to start their own company, their own corporation, to embed these loyalists, these royalists deep within our own country and our own republic. And they're not just sitting in Congress, many of these individuals, or the executive branch, and you have to look to names like King, Kaiser, and others. They are deep within the judiciary, and they are actively, aggressively working to take down the United States from within. These programs of economic warfare, these are not matters of defect or default. They are intentional. And we are such a wealthy country, such a good people, that it is taking a lot of effort to take down the United States so that they can form this quote-unquote more perfect union of the North American Union between Canada, the United States, and Mexico, and eventually merge it into North and South America, have them at a contest of wills for a period of time, and then merge them together, much like they are doing in the European Union. And you can say that, well, that may not be a bad thing, but this should be coming of, by, and for the people, and not to where it is a select group of insiders who are profiting from this knowledge and from these efforts. Thank you. My name is Lieutenant Eric Shine. Start to look into some of these matters and do your own research. Don't believe what I say. Go ahead and start to do your own research and get word out. Go watch the movie Zeitgeist Addendum. It's very eye-opening. Take care. Thank you. Peace.
Much graver and universal interest occupy our minds today.